Hi, I'm Deboki and this is Okie Dokie Boki, and today I am going to be doing a Q&A. I kind of figured that this week I would not really have any brain power to work on a review. So thank you to everyone who's sending questions from the last video or on Instagram and stuff, because it is much easier to answer questions right now than to actually have to think original thoughts this week. So I am filming this at 10:45 a.m. on Saturday, November 7th. So that is the status of things right now for me and the rest of America and everyone else who is invested in knowing the outcome of the US election. So, it's been a fucking week. So I've divided up the questions that I got into kind of four overarching categories. I'm gonna start off with the one that I guess is the most uncategorized set of questions, kind of just a general set of me questions. And then next I'll do some science stuff. So that'll be both stuff about science writing, but also just stuff about science. And then after that will be questions about books, because obviously this is a booktube channel and that is a thing that we talk about here on booktube. And then after that will be just a few kind of TV oriented questions. The first question is actually a question that I think I got asked in my last Q&A video, and I was too lazy to look it up because I also didn't care. It was the kind of thing where even if I found out that I had already answered this question, I was gonna answer it again. And that is, how did you get your cat? I'm never gonna not take an opportunity to talk about my cat. So I have had my cat now for 6 years, I think. His name is Bastion. So I went to a local shelter and I looked at the cats, and because I hadn't had one, I just was strictly there with a friend to just look at him, just to see, the cats, see what they look like. And there were 3 cats there that I thought would be awesome. There's a cute little kitten, there's another shy cat, and then Bastion was fucking adorable. So this was a no cage, no kill shelter, so all the cats were kind of roaming free, and he was just up in his own little back shelf. He was I'm not fucking with these other cats. I am on my back shelf. If you want to see me, you gotta come back here and meet me. So I did. And then the thing that I remember about him that really struck me is that even though he was back there and huddled, he immediately, as soon as I put out my little fist to I don't know, give him my scent or whatever. I don't know what a cat calls it, but he immediately started headbutting my hand to get the pets, And so this other woman was looking at him, and I was okay, you know what, she's probably gonna adopt him. And I was gonna be traveling soon, so I wasn't gonna adopt a cat at that point. So I had this list of 3 cats in my mind that if I come back from this trip and they're still there, maybe maybe I'll adopt them. But I didn't think Bastion was gonna be there when I came back. But then I came back and he was still there, which blows my mind because he's the best cat. He is such a good cat. He was a 6 or 7-year-old cat when I adopted him, so he was I don't know, a little bit older than I guess what a lot of people are looking for. But I will say, as someone who was new to adopting cats, I'm really glad that I went with an older one, because I feel he just he came knowing how to do things. So even when I, as a cat owner, didn't know what I was doing, he mostly knew. Not obviously he doesn't know everything. He doesn't know that the vet is technically good for him. And he does not know the time, which drives me up a wall. But I'll forgive him those things because he is such a good cat. So the next 2 questions are similar, but I think there are kind of 2 different angles to them. So the first one is, how did you make the decision to move away from research after PhD, financially especially? And the other one is, what helped you decide the aim of your life? Is there any specific incident? Starting with that second one, that kind of big picture, deciding what you're gonna do with your life. I don't think that there's any inciting incident. I think there's inciting people. I feel a lot of the aims in my life have been shaped from, growing up with parents who are academics. So, they're really interested in science, but also really interested in teaching and really caring in that way, wanting to share their knowledge and really believing in both knowledge and the power of sharing it with other people. And then also, teachers. I had a high school English teacher who really helped me realized that writing was a thing that was a part of me. My advisor in grad school was someone who really shaped a lot of the way that I've approached my career, even as someone who's not in academia. A lot of the things I learned from him, I feel I've translated over into other areas of my life. And then there's all of these friends who've inspired me as well, people who've changed careers in their different points in their life, and or have been really dedicated to a certain set of values, that kind of thing. So I feel it's really more been by watching watching other people around me that I've gotten a better sense of like what it is that I myself want to do and how I want to do it. Getting back more into that like decision to move away from research. So I've talked a little bit about like moving away from research into like science writing just over the course of my channel, especially like through that Not My Thesis series that I used to do. And there were a lot of like my own personal reasons of just like, you know, not wanting to stay in academia. The financial stuff I think is really important, and it's also kind of difficult to sort through. One of the things with academia is that it doesn't pay that well. Going from grad school to postdoc, like postdocs do not get paid that much more than grad students do. At least I got paid a pretty decent stipend as a grad student, which is partially because the program I was in, like it's an engineering program, so they tend to pay the students a little bit better. I was also living in Boston, so that was part of like what I was being paid. So like obviously it was a grad school. I'm not going to pretend that I was like, you know, raking in lots of money, but like I don't want to like pretend also that I was like living in complete poverty, because I wasn't. Like it was like actually a decent stipend. I got married midway through grad school, and my husband and I were not living together. So that like in terms of the finances was not like a thing where like he was necessarily supporting me directly that way, but like because of all of these other people in my life, I had all of these other buffers financially that then carried over into when I decided to do an internship in New York. And like internships in New York, you know, they don't pay particularly well, and mine definitely didn't. I got paid $13.50 an hour, which I think is pretty abysmal. And people talk about like, you know, how unpaid internships affect, you know, the demographics of who's going to be able to do an internship at your company. I think we also need to talk about the fact that low paying internships are going to affect who can work at your company. I was able to take on that internship because I had financial support through these other means. A lot of people don't have that. And if you want to diversify your newsroom, like, yeah, sure, I can bring my brownness to that, but I'm still going to look like a lot of the other people working in your newsroom in like these really key ways. I feel like weird about saying that stuff because I also don't want to discourage people from like entering the industry if they're worried about this issue, because I think like we need more people, but I say this more because I think from like the side of people who can make a difference, like I think they need to really like assess the ways that they are like bringing people into the field, because it's going to affect things. And for me, this is still an evolving process, because like I am still gaining confidence in myself as a freelancer, as a contractor, in setting my rates, in setting like what my hours are, like all of these things. It's a hard thing to figure out, and what has helped me most is watching other people talk about it and really establish like their boundaries around what they're okay with in terms of contract hours, contract language, stuff like that. So I still think there are ways in which I can be more assertive, and one of the things that I've started doing is setting sort of like a yearly goal for what I want to make. And so that has helped me sort of think about what kind of projects I want to take on. And it's not like if I don't meet that goal that I'll feel like I've like financially failed, but it is helpful for me for assessing just, I don't know, what I'm on track for. The other thing that's been really helpful is using like a budgeting software, so that I am keeping much more careful track, especially as a freelancer, as a contractor, like you have to be in charge of your own taxes and stuff like that. So I use a combination of You Need a Budget for setting up my budget, and I also use Airtable for tracking my invoices and all the money I've made, as well as keeping track of what I need to pay on my estimated taxes and stuff like that. So okay, so moving on to like some sciencey / science writing stuff, some useful context for if you're new for my channel. Some of these questions are going to be related to like two things. One is that I am a writer for Journey to the Microcosmos, which is a show about microbes here on YouTube. The other thing is that I'm the host for Crash Course Organic Chemistry. So going back to microbes, what is the hardest part of writing about microbes? I think one of the hard things is just like there is so much information out there, but it is covered in so much different stuff. So James, our microscopist, our master of microscopes, he like sends me sources for things that he knows about the microbes that he's been, you know, filming and like learning more about. So that's like one of my initial big sources. The other is just like I Google the shit out of it. The thing though that's hard is that because microscopy is also such a hobby, there's a lot of information out there that is collected by hobbyists who are really, really good, but like understanding on my end who it is I can rely on and what information I can rely on is a little bit difficult compared to like people who are documenting it in an academic setting, which, you know, does not always mean that the information you're going to get about microbes like out of a peer-reviewed paper is necessarily better than a hobbyist, but like it's a little bit easier for me to verify and work through and see, like, do I agree with the conclusions that they've drawn? So just figuring out like what sources are good is difficult. And it's also difficult because the sources are just so varied. Like sometimes I'm reading papers from like the 1700s, and then other times I'm just reading like a really janky blog like that's like made on like a GeoCity style kind of page. So it's really fun. Like that is the thing that I actually really love about it, is that you're hunting down information from all of these different places. Relating to that, what is your favorite microbe fact? Oh, my favorite one. So a thing that I have been like increasingly obsessed with this year is the evolution of buttholes, because this is a thing that I didn't fully appreciate until I started working on this show, because we were doing an episode about like how microbes poop. So my favorite microbe fact is that hydras, which are this multicellular organism that are super cool. They're like, they look just like this, like they're just like an arm with like things waving around, right? I don't know why I said right, as if you're like, yeah, totally, I can imagine hydras now. I'll try to like get a picture and put it here. Or just watch our episode about hydras. So they don't have mouths, but they still need to eat food. So what they do is they tear like a hole open that intakes food, right? So they take in food through this way. It goes into like the central cavity, which is where their gut is. They seal back up, digest the food, get the nutrients, but then they need to release the waste. So what do? Well, they rip themselves back open through that opening and release the waste out through that, which means that their butthole is effectively also their mouth, and they're just always tearing it open and close, and like that is how they eat. They're just always opening up their mouth, consuming food, closing it, and then opening it back up to make a butthole. And so like that to me on its own is wild. And then the reason why the evolution of buttholes is particularly fascinating to me is this fact that I did not appreciate, and now like I appreciate it like as a human. Buttholes are what allow us to eat continuously, because if you were an organism that does not have a separate entrance for your food and a separate exit for your waste, you can only consume food after you've digested your food. So that would be really annoying, right? Because you have to eat the food, digest it, and then like release it. And you cannot eat any food in the meantime, because otherwise it's gonna fuck with that digestion. But because of the butthole, we are able to intake food, digest it, and because it's going in a different direction, that direction, you can keep eating. And that to me is so cool. It's so weird and so cool. And the evolution of buttholes, it turns out, is kind of a mystery. So again, if you want to know more about this and what this means on the micro level, you should watch that How Microbes Poop episode, because first of all, it has a lot of great footage of microbes pooping, but also we get into this stuff, and I just think it's so wild. I also got a question about suggesting like the best organic chemistry book. One of my favorite chemistry textbooks from college was Chemical Bonds: An Introduction to Atomic and Molecular Structure by Harry Gray. It's not a huge textbook. It's actually like pretty like manageable. It's like just kind of like a book-sized book. And it's super, super readable, and the diagrams are really, really useful. And so even though it is not strictly an organic chemistry textbook, it will be super useful for understanding a lot of like that atomic and molecular theory that goes into what makes organic chemistry work. Moving away from like a technical book, some good pop science book recommendations or favorite philosophy books. I don't know that I have like any favorite philosophy books that I can recommend, but for good pop science books, one is The Emperor of All Maladies by Siddhartha Mukherjee. And that book is just like this huge ass book about cancer. It's like this incredibly extensive history combined with like modern like stories from Mukherjee's own experience as a doctor working with patients who have cancer. So it is not a happy book, but it's also not like a depressing book either, because a lot of that book is about the progress we've made when it comes to medicine, to understanding how cancer works and how we can treat it. So I think that's one that I would recommend. And then any of the books that like Nicole and I talk about for Nonfiction Book Club, we're reading The End of Everything, Astrophysically Speaking, by Katie Mack. We're gonna be talking about that next week. So that's the other book I guess I would recommend. Then another question, what are new areas of science outside your background you are most interested in learning about? So I'm gonna try to like avoid anything biology related. The thing I'm gonna have to say is probably just like all of space. For work, I had to learn more about like all that Venus stuff that was happening, like why we thought there might be life on Venus. And so this is a little bit cheating because like I feel like this is delving back into biology, but like I promise my fascination was less about the biology. It was more about like why Venus is so different. Just that whole cycle of like the way different elements of a planet's structure like interact to create the whole planet is like weird to me, and it's not a thing I completely understand. What Venus's atmosphere looks like that to me was just like, oh, okay, I guess, yeah, okay. So I filmed, part of this Q&A in the morning. Couldn't finish all the questions because we were gonna go out and do some stuff. As you might have guessed, some stuff happened. We left the house at like 11:30. We got to where we were gonna do some curbside pickup. My husband got out of the car. I was just waiting for him and checked my email and was like, well, what do we have here, New York Times? You are calling it. So yeah, and then like it was one of those things where I read the email and then realized that all the cars were honking, and it was just that. This is like the first time I think since I've moved out here that I kind of miss living in a city, because like just scrolling through my Twitter feed, seeing like all the videos of like just people celebrating, wearing masks, so like hopefully in a safe way, but like I'm like, yeah, I kind of miss that energy. Got my celebratory rosé for the night. We busted out champagne glasses instead of drinking out of like old salsa jars, so we're really classing it up. But I didn't want to finish the rest of these questions. So the next category of questions was the books question. The first question is, what was your entry point into becoming a romance reader? And I am not completely sure. It's one of those things where I feel like I've been reading romance for so long that I'm not completely sure how I got into it. My best guess is that it's probably connected to me like having read fan fiction growing up, because may have been searching for the more romantic, and I think that is sort of like where a lot of people do get some of their starting points with like the romance genre overall. I think there's a lot of crossover between fanfic and romance. But I think I got more into reading romance when I was in college, and I'm not sure what set it off. Like, I don't know what was the starting point. I just remember I think I started reading sort of like urban fantasy, paranormal romance kind of things. It's funny because I now don't really read as much paranormal romance or like urban fantasy kind of romance, but that is where my starting point was. Next question, what genre do you think challenges you the most as a reader, and why? That's a really good question. Okay, so definitely I'm gonna have to say literary fiction is a tough one for me. And like obviously literary fiction is super broad, but it is definitely like the sort of book that for me, I know that I'm gonna go into like obsessed with the idea of like whether or not I am getting everything, whether or not I'm appreciating everything. And I don't know if that's partly because of like the way that I read other people talking about these books, like where I sometimes will read people describe books in certain ways and feel like I don't know if I will ever see a book in that way, not in like a I disagree with them sort of manner, but more just like I personally like don't feel like equipped with that kind of vision, or like that kind of like lens of reading. And so I think sometimes I get kind of self-conscious about that, and that like affects the way that I'm reading it. And so then it just becomes this whole chore of like, am I getting it? Am I not getting it? Am I asking the right questions? And then if I like feel like I'm getting something, then I inevitably feel like I'm overthinking it or I'm being really pretentious. So, it's kind of a lose-lose situation there, except that the thing I've realized is that I should just read it and see what I get out of it. And this question asks what challenges me the most as a reader, but I will say I think the other genre that challenges me a lot as a reader and also as a reviewer, maybe more so than literary fiction, is nonfiction. And I think some of that stems from like wanting or like wishing that I could really assess all of the nonfiction I read like in a very academic way. And obviously there are some nonfiction books I can read where even if it's not like my field of expertise, I might know enough going into it to be able to like engage with what it's telling me. But there is still sort of that element of like, because I am not familiar with like, the techniques of how they're gathering those facts, like whether that's the reporting methods, the research methods, just anything, because I'm not familiar with the techniques, I'm not familiar with like, I don't know, like the foundational assumptions going into like this work or whatever. There is that gap between, being able to understand the book and being able to criticize it. And it's hard because I think it's really important to read nonfiction critically, because that it is like presenting some kind of argument based on like ostensibly some set of facts to you, but because a lot of us are reading nonfiction in part to learn about something that we don't know, being able to assess it critically is very, very difficult. And that's the thing that I really struggle with as a reviewer. And I talked about this at length way back when I talked about the lack of fact checking in publishing when it comes to nonfiction. And that's actually a big part of why I've liked doing the nonfiction book club with Nicole, because I think it's just so much more useful to be able to process what I'm reading like in nonfiction with someone else, especially like when we're reading something like in sociology. Like we read recently The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. That is a book that like on my own I don't think I would have like been able to fully appreciate a lot of the stuff that was going into it, like a lot of the intellectual inspiration behind it and the framework behind it and stuff. And so getting to talk to Nicole about like, okay, you know, these are the different ideas going into this book and this is part of why it's framed this way, that was super, super helpful, because just on my own I think it would have been a lot less productive for me. Okay, next question. What's your reader journey been like? For example, a change in tastes over the years, genres, format preferences, etc. That's a big question. It's a good one to think about too, because I don't really think about it that much in terms of like my overall journey. I started out as like the Barnes & Noble's kid. Like I was just always in the kids section of Barnes & Noble's reading whatever looked good. Like for me, my most vivid memory is reading like all of the Sailor Moons, which is why I've been collecting them, in part just because of the nostalgia. I read a lot of books from the YA section, but like I think especially like if you are in my age group also, you know that YA then was sort of a different beast from what it is now. This was a pre-Twilight era, and so while there are a lot of the origins of YA, you can see them in those books, it looked different. Like that's all I can say. Like for one, there were not as many grown-ups in the YA section at that time. There was one that was about like a girl who like didn't have the fear gene, and that was like her superpower basically. Another one that I loved was the Sweep series, which was about like Wicca and witches and stuff. Like people talk about YA trilogies these days. Like remember when we had to read like 15 books to get like the whole story? In college, I double majored in biomedical engineering and English, but I was doing my English degree at a school that was primarily geared towards like engineering and sciences. So it's like our concept of an English major I think was a little bit different. But I remember my favorite classes were basically like the classes that were kind of organized around like, I guess, genre-y kind of books, or things that would now be considered genre books, even though at the time maybe they weren't. So these were classes like I took a gothic horror class, I took a noir class, and I ended up writing my thesis on women in noir. So I think in terms of my reader's journey, I don't know if I could like have a good sense of how to describe it. I think this is a good question to think on like longer term, and like maybe I'll get back to this in a future video because I think this is interesting. I just sort of like need to think about like concrete things to sort of like pin it on. Last question for the book section. What tips would you give to people interested in getting involved with booktube? Which is also a great question that like I could make a full video on its own, and a lot of people have made videos on this this very topic. I think a thing that is useful if you want to like have fun with booktube or like enjoy it is to actually like come up with definitions for your success then that aren't like contingent on the numbers, or to think about the things you're trying to get out of booktube that have nothing to do with those numbers. Like something I told myself early on, and I think I may have put this in my like booktube newbie tag, what I was gonna kind of consider successful for me with this channel is if I was gonna still be doing it in 5 years. I'm almost at 5 years, I think next June I might be at 5 years of booktube. And for me, it wasn't like, okay, if I don't hit 5 years of booktube, like if I give up on booktube, then that means I'm a failure, because that's not true. You know, there's other shit that happens, there's stuff that comes up in your life, and I've had phases of like, I can't really be posting as much content right now, I'm tired, I'm stressed, you know, whatever, all of that stuff. The reason why I framed it that way is like, if I'm doing booktube in 5 years, I'm gonna be happy, is that I just wanted this to be a thing that I was doing in a way that was sustainable for myself. So I think just figuring out ways to define your success that aren't going to be contingent on other people is a useful thing for booktube, and probably for other things as well. In terms of like more practical advice, I think the most useful thing you can do for your channel when you're starting out is doing the booktube newbie tag. You might want to do a few videos first, so that way if people are finding your content through the booktube newbie tag, and you just need to Google the booktube newbie tag and you'll find like the questions and everything. Film a few videos first, do the booktube newbie tag, and then people will be able to find your channel. They'll be able to find the videos you posted already, and like they'll get to know you a little bit better. So that is, I think, a super good way to start at the booktube community, because it is really the most like community oriented tag in terms of bringing new people in. Last set of questions are going to be TV questions, and I've got a bunch about Korean dramas. So I got like what are your favorite Korean dramas, and what are your top 3 dramas to binge watch right now. So my favorite by far, and I've talked about this recently, is Hotel Del Luna, which I watched recently. It is a show about like basically a hotel for ghosts who are transitioning to the afterlife. There are so many things I loved about that show. Just like emotionally, it was like perfect. If you're looking for something that makes you want to feel like sad but hopeful, but like sad in like a really productive way, like just cathartic. That show is so good. And the actress, I think IU, like she was amazing, and I'm kind of now obsessed with getting on to the rest of her K-dramas. I know she was in a show called My Ajushi, which like people have said is amazing, so that is on my to watch list. Romance is a Bonus Book, which I did a whole video on, I also really loved. I'm trying to think, there's another one I watched recently I'm already blanking on the title of. Oh, okay, here it is, I found it. Okay, so there's this great show called The Lies Within, which I don't see that many people talking about ever. And I don't know why, because I loved this one. It's about this woman whose dad was like a lawmaker, and he's been killed, and her husband was like maybe involved, but he's gone missing. So she has to team up with a detective to figure out what's gone on. And then in the meantime, she's been forced to become a lawmaker as well. She's basically been forced to replace her dad. Like she's getting blackmailed or kind of manipulated into it. And it's like this very twisty conspiracy show. In terms of which K-dramas I'm currently watching, I'm kind of having a hard time getting into K-dramas right now. I'm sort of like kind of dabbling in and out of just like whatever's on Netflix. So like right now that's been like, I've watched the first few episodes of Private Lives, which is about con men who I think are going to take on like a Facebook like kind of social media company that's like overusing people's private information. But right now I'm just finding it very like messy and all over the place. I also started watching It's Okay to Not Be Okay, which a lot of people have loved, but I have had a really hard time getting into it. Like I love an unlikable heroine, and I've loved this recent trend of like more prickly heroines in Korean dramas, like Hotel Del Luna, amazing, like kind of anti-hero heroine, or I guess just call him an anti-heroine, right? But It's Okay to Not Be Okay, like for me, almost seems to be crossing into the line of like the kind of like YA hero bullshit that I hate, or like, you know, an alpha male bullshit I kind of like hate, where like it's like this sort of like possessive boundary crossing behavior that like in those alpha male characters I just find really annoying. But because it's now in the female character, I feel like I'm supposed to find it, I don't know, more compelling for some reason, and I don't yet find it compelling. The one thing is that the show is gorgeous. Like the artwork is beautiful and the music is amazing, and I really think that the main actor and actress are like both on their own super charming. I should maybe finish it because I know people have loved it, so I don't know if it's like maybe those things I dislike are gonna like finally be explained in a way that will make sense. So I'm not sure. The other one I started watching is Hyena, which is about like asshole lawyers just being asshole lawyers to each other. And that was fun, but I've only watched one episode, and so I just kind of like need to give it, I guess, a little bit more time. Okay, so the last question, I'm really excited for this question. Which Real Housewife do you most identify with? If you're not familiar, because I don't think I talk about this on this channel that often. If you follow me like on Twitter and like other social media stuff, like you've probably picked up on this, but I don't talk about it that much in this channel, aside from one video I made like a long time ago about the cast of Vanderpump Rules. But basically the thing is that I really love reality TV, but like a particular strain of it. Like I love Bravo TV shows. Not all, like I haven't watched all of them, and I have strong opinions about the directions that some of them have taken, including Vanderpump Rules, which was one of my favorite shows for a long time, but I'm starting to realize that it kind of just like I'm starting to hate it, and I'm just like have been drawn in to the most annoying relationship of my life because I cannot let it go. The thing I have generally found is that the housewives that I personally most identify with are usually the ones that other people, not me, I would never ever use these words to describe them, but basically these are the housewives that other people call condescending, or they say that these are the housewives who think that they're better than the rest of the cast. So these are people like your Heather Dubrow from Real Housewives of Orange County, or like your Carol Radziwill from Real Housewives of New York, or like your Ariana from Vanderpump Rules. And I think a new one who I personally love is Wendy from Real Housewives of Potomac, partially because Wendy has this whole underlying plot line of like whether or not she wants to continue on this academic trajectory that like she has all of this like deep attachment to, in part because of like what it means to her family. And I'm like, oh, you got me with that storyline. And like, yes, sure, in the last episode she wielded her degrees in a really tacky way with her conversation with Karen, but also Wendy fucking laughed at herself after. I love her, you know, like right now I love her. She's new, so maybe I'm gonna find out some things where I don't like her so much. But yeah, give me your condescending housewives. Sure, Heather Dubrow might speak in a way that's condescending, say, to an Alexis Bellino in Real Housewives of Orange County, and maybe is positioning herself as like above some of the antics of, say, a Kelly Dodd. But is she wrong? And then like Ariana from Vanderpump Rules calling out her trash castmates, drunkenly shitting on all of them at the reunion this year, because that is what the show needed, is someone who is going to point out how fucking ridiculous Jax Taylor is and the fact that he gets away with so much. Those are the housewives that I identify the most with, because I love them. That is all of the questions. It is now 7:37. I am going to go downstairs so that I can drink some more and watch Biden's speech, which I think is supposed to come on in like 20 minutes, and enjoy this while I can, because surely Trump is gonna pull some bullshit. Actually, let me double check Twitter and make sure that he hasn't pulled some bullshit. I forgot that the Trump bullshit he's pulling is the 4 Seasons Total Landscaping press conference. I'm never gonna be over all of these videos of everyone just honking through the night. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for watching me through the course of this fucking day. Thank you for watching me through the course of this glass, and be safe, celebrate responsibly, and yeah, thank you guys for watching. Bye.